Coming up, we are smack in the beginning of preseason game number 1. Practice sessions with the Detroit Lions are coming here. But what are our key takeaways from camp so far? Players that are rising, some that could be falling, and a bit of a broader look at how Darren Waller could really open up this offense for different players than you might expect. It's all coming up next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here. Adam Armbrecht breaking down the Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast, breaking down the Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. And over here, it's the New York Football Giants, where I'm joined by the healthy, wealthy, and wise, the seasoned generational ticket holder, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
I'm doing good, Adam. I'm feeling good. I'm excited. The Giants get to practice against someone other than the New York Giants this week, which really starts to feel like, okay, they're up against competition. We're starting to get into the start of the season. I'm getting really pumped.
Dude, of course, right? Like, because all of these things, and it's something that we talked a little bit about last week as well, where it's like, there hasn't been a lot of times over the last couple of years where camp gets you excited about certain players. This year, not only was it Jalin Hyatt, obviously, who was like, oh, why did he drop in the draft? Is there a reason? Can the guy not run routes? Well, now you're seeing the speed, you're seeing the burst, you're seeing the playmaking. That gets you excited. You get Tre Hawkins coming out of nowhere at a position of need where we know he can be carving out a role for himself. Darien Beavers coming back, plug in, right? Like, there's so many good narratives coming out of it. But now we'll get to see, like, now there's like confirm that like some of the really bright spots we're seeing are predicated on the skill sets and not just the fact that, hey, maybe we're lacking defensively and that's why Jalin Hyatt's running amok, right? Or our receiver's not that good potentially, and that's why Tre Hawkins is blanketing dudes all over the field. So that's the thing that gets me excited about that, which we'll get to a little bit more in a second here. But it's good to feel like we're now officially entering the season, right? Like, I know preseason games don't matter, but this is like that next step forward.
Yeah, but also we're also talking about like non-padded drills. We're talking about 7-on-7s. We're talking about like different things than what actual football is played with. But the other thing is that you go against the same people in practice. Maybe they're not as physical. Maybe they don't want to hit you. So like going against another team where they don't care who you are is a really good test to find out like, where does this stand? Are you just beating a guy because like you know his tendencies in practice every single time? Like, let's start getting out there for guys that you don't see every day. Let's see who's, continuing to build on all the good work that they've done and who maybe kind of takes a little bit of regression back to the meat.
You better believe it, man. So we talk about, obviously, mention some of those guys like a Tre Hawkins, like a Jalin Hyatt. They're coming out with obviously rave reviews so far in camp. So we're not going to belabor those points just because those are the names that are on everyone's minds right now. Other really notable ones, it is Darien Beavers, because Micah McFadden looks like he's progressing nicely, but the bulk of the first team reps are going to Darien Beavers. So it's really exciting for a guy, when they asked him, said it was brutal. First time he's had like a big injury like this in his playing career, let alone professionally, obviously, but like all the way down. He said that, Pop Warner hadn't had an injury that forced him to sit out. So seeing him back in there and thinking, well, it can be Okereke and now Darien Beavers, and not just that's what the starting lineup is, but also that like a good starting lineup, like a lineup that actually gets you a little bit confident about what they could accomplish.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Tre Hawkins just being one of them. One of the names that I keep coming back to that has been forgotten now that Tre Hawkins has been talked about so much is Deonte Banks, right? First round draft pick for the Giants, came off to a very, very poor start to training camp, slow start. Not supposed to overreact to things, but you saw him go one-on-one against Darren Waller in one of his worst reps of the entire preseason, where he just got absolutely burned, didn't jam him on the line. Listen, Deonte Banks, he is a rookie. He's coming in and he's saying all the right things. On Friday, he came out and said, I'm just kind of getting my body acclimated, getting my mind acclimated to how camp goes. This is my first time. I'm just trying to get through it, taking it day by day, trying to choose one thing I can get it better at every day. Right. That's someone that I want to look at as we continue to progress into training camp and say, all right, you have that athleticism and those skill sets that got you drafted in the first round. Let's continue to get better and better, and let's pretend like this is a Jamar Chase case where back in the preseason when Jamar Chase was a rookie, they said, oh, he's dropped the ball 3 times. Is he going to be able to make it in the NFL? I think Jamar Chase has done just fine since then.
You better believe it, man. It's good. So we can flip flop here, some positives, some maybe potentially negatives. But as you see, Andy, they're giving you a nice little silver lining. Another positive coming out of camp here is John Michael Schmitz. We said this going back a couple of weeks that it just seems like a matter of when, not if, he's going to be the starter. It slowly progressed that way. The rotation with Bredesen was occurring early in camp. That's gone away now, too. So locking in a player, as we said, like, I want to have that tandem. I want to have my quarterback in Daniel Jones feel like he has consistency under center. It's not even about the quality, maybe differential starting this season between Schmitz and Bredesen potentially. It's just about, hey, plug him in, and now you don't touch him for the next decade, hopefully, right? Like, and Daniel Jones has not had that relationship with his center yet, so it's good to see that that's progressing. Now we get to see, does he hold up against some good tests here against Detroit as well?
Yeah, you're seeing Ben Bredesen today starting at center with the ones. So some people are saying this competition.
Right on the heels of it going the other way. Of course, today while I'm preparing for the show, he goes with the ones.
No, but listen, this is the second day in a row that they're letting him do it, and what I think they're doing with Bredesen is they're kind of making sure that he's the jack of all trades utility guy
Right.
across the three central positions of that offensive line, whether it's left guard, center, or right guard. It feels like if someone gets nicked up or dinged, Bredesen is kind of the jack of all trades that can really step into any of those and at least perform admirably or at replacement level. What I think was important there also, as you talked about John Michael Schmitz, I still keep going back to Daniel Jones. I mean, the guy has been scrutinized, signed the big contract in the offseason. He's saying all the right things and he's doing all the right things since getting the contract. Adam, he has looked spectacular. No way around it. He has had command of this offense. They say that the ball has zip on it that they haven't seen before. He's building rapport with guys like Darren Waller early, Jalin Hyatt early. Like, to me, I know we want to highlight some of the other guys, but for as much criticism and scrutiny as Daniel Jones gets, right now you could not ask for more of what's being reported out of Jones in camp so far.
And now I know you're gonna follow up with Art Stapleton's question for him in camp, but I think you're right, and it's kind of funny because if you're a Giants fan, I think that we all collectively acknowledge this idea of like, listen, the contract aside, we believe that like this is a quarterback that's taking the little incremental steps forward. The growth is going to be there. We see the stability of the line building. We see more weapons coming in. So in our minds, like it just feels like this is a foregone conclusion that he's going to be successful this year. Still want to see him checking those boxes, but I think that's probably why like in-house the focus becomes on all the other pieces around him because we're going, yeah, check the box at quarterback. I do find it interesting the way like national coverage looks at it because I think very much all the way up until week one, every single pass that he throws, it's going to be the contract, it's going to be the money, right? It's going to be the commitment the Giants made to this guy. Was it right or wrong? Whereas the Giants fan base, I think by and large, is saying like, yeah, he's the guy. Like this is what we're all done with that narrative. We can focus on other things.
Yeah, well, and now focusing on the other things are like Art Stapleton of NorthJersey.com asking him if he considers himself elite. Like,
Dude,
have
why
we ever
not?
heard that before about a New York Giants quarterback ever being questioned whether or not he's elite or can win the big game? So the new narrative is starting, and Daniel Jones actually gave an interesting response, and he said, "I'm very confident in myself. I'm very confident that I can play this game at a high level and lead this team to win a lot of games." Art Stapleton says he paused before adding, "Yeah, I'm pretty confident in myself." So I think Jones is now kind of settling into his own skin where it's like, there's no question about, am I going to be pulled in game two? What's going on? The Giants have made the commitment. He has agreed to be here. And it feels like he's getting more and more comfortable with being the vocal leader of this team and having the confidence that a starting quarterback needs.
Yeah, I think that that idea, especially with this question, right? Are you elite? And that makes you think of Eli and the personality, the delivery of some responses. It does recall flashes of Eli Manning. But I think that like Daniel Jones is clearly his own personality. And I think he is, I'm saying demonstrative in a different way. You've seen him on game days, right? Like he's way more animated early in his career than Eli Manning ever was. Like towards the back end of Eli's career in key playoff moments, you would see it from Eli. I think that Daniel Jones is clearly the more fiery guy. And I think that while Eli never lacked for confidence, I think Daniel Jones like has confidence that he's willing to share. And there was another, I don't know, I can't give credit to who asked him the question, but it was about the outside noise and opinions, etc. And he brought it right back to, yeah, as long as I'm respected in the locker room, as long as the guys on my team, how they feel about me is really what I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about anything else. So he's doing like the both and, right? The dudes in here like me. I'm not worried about what anyone else has to say. I am very confident in what I'm doing. I'm trying to get better each and every day. And I'll add this there was another little video that came out. The Giants posted this of Kayvon Thibodeau in terms of, is he well liked? Is he respected? Do guys gravitate towards him? Thibodeau came up to him like at the in between a session as they're about to break down the practice. And he was like, hey, you good? You good? I just, you know what I mean? Like making sure anyone coming near you, like anybody, it seemed like we got a little close to you a couple of times there, but it wasn't said as like a tongue in cheek poke. It was like, there was such an earnest delivery of that. It felt like, you need some milk and cookies? You want a bedtime story? Tuck you in? Like whatever you need, guy. Like there does seem to be a very nice transition into this new era of Giants football under Brian Daboll that feels connected. Like all the other iterations, regardless of whether or not the coaching was bad, the GM, the this, the that, it always felt like a hodgepodge of thrown in players. Like you never had this sense of they were all on the same track or timeline. This does feel that way, even with the blend of veterans and obviously young guys.
I couldn't agree more. It is interesting. Stark difference between what's going on in Dallas and what's going on in New York, with Kayvon
Right.
Thibodeau being like, you good? And Diggs basically calling out Dak Prescott every chance he gets. Everyone says not a big deal. I don't know. Seems like everyone respects Daniel Jones in the building and no one wants to say anything bad about him. But we're going to find out now that the Giants are going and having these practices with Detroit, whether or not other teams feel the same way that the Giants did.
100%. So when we think about these Detroit sessions coming up, and you can see if you're watching us over on YouTube, we have a little notepad. We scribble down some notes. One giant watch for me, and this can go a lot of different ways, but coming off of discussing Daniel Jones, also saw him practicing, working on the reps when it came to pocket presence, mobility, right? Shifting in tight spaces. And I think you go back to last year and he looked a lot more confident, certainly held himself in the pocket a lot better. The timing and decision making about when to tuck the ball and get out of the pocket just seemed more deliberate than almost, forced upon him, which, by the way, makes sense because the offensive line play hasn't been strong. I really do want to see, as you get outside of the Giants and start to get into these sessions with Detroit, I do want to just see that footwork, the decision making, the processing. I want to see that to continue to get better. And that's not only Daniel Jones, it's obviously the offensive line in front of him. But now, more than the first handful of years for Daniel Jones, the weapons are there for you. So staying committed to the pocket as long as possible actually does behoove you, because there's going to be a lot more chances in theory for deep plays, down the plays, explosive plays, guys getting open late in route combinations, right? So like, there is still an evolution to Daniel Jones as a quarterback here that he needs to evolve as he's working through with a lot of these new guys.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because for me, it has something that directly correlates to that, and that is the right tackle position. Knowing that Evan
Yeah.
Neal is in the concussion protocol, and we saw what Matt Pert did against Kayvon Thibodeau. He was not looking too good in practice, knowing that Kayvon Thibodeau is one of the upper echelon types of defensive end, edge rush type players. But
Good thing they got
man,
Tyree
we're gonna
Phillips in the camp here as well to give a little bit of, because
right.
Matt Pert to this point, speaking of, has not exactly endeared himself as being a guy that's going to stick around here potentially long term.
Right. Well, but it's going to be important to see what Phillips does or Pert does against another pass rush like
Yeah.
the Detroit Lions, who have guys like Aiden Hutchinson that can get to the quarterback. Evan Neal struggled in his first year, seemed to be gaining a little bit more confidence, feels like he's growing into what he needs. It's not the best thing in the world to get a concussion or get an injury in camp, but we still do need to have a serviceable third offensive tackle on this roster. And if Phillips and Perk can get more playing time and get a little bit more comfortable with being that swing tackle, that could be a win for the Giants in the long term.
Oh, listen, I mean, it's funny too, because I remember thinking at the time of the concussion for Evan Neal, which he'll go through the protocols and it should be fine. He'll get back ready. But to your point, like, it's a cautionary tale because for the most part, as we had McCathan came off the PUP list for the Giants, we saw Zudu come off earlier in the offseason as well. And we're looking at these other positions, right? And maybe Bredesen and Glowinski, and you feel confident on the inside there around the rookie and Schmitz. But like, for all the excitement this offseason, I don't know what Evan Neal, you mentioned, like he needs to take an Andrew Thomas size step forward, but him being taken away, well, now at least it elevates a question mark at right tackle in a different way than can your high first round draft pick in year number 2 take a step forward. So it does become interesting to see how these practice sessions go. Don't expect to see Neal there. He's going to travel with the team they reported, but I don't think he's going to necessarily play in these sessions the next 2 days. So you'll get a good look at what if, right? What if we need some reps here from a backup? Are they going to be able to at least play consistently enough that it doesn't throw off the rhythm of what should be a very exciting offense for this team?
Yeah, exactly, Adam. Good for other people to get reps. That's what preseason and training camp is for. That's one to definitely watch. Is there anything else from these next couple sessions with Detroit that you are really interested in looking at?
The only other note that I had before we move on to just a specific player that we want to talk about, obviously Darren Waller, who's looked every bit of the part here in camp. And I went to the research department. We got some pretty good stats on this. But Evan Neal, I also watched one. He was doing some reps with, former lineman. I'm going to lose him. Giants guy. Oh, boy. He's getting
Sean
sad. Sean
O'Hara?
O'Hare. I got there. Woo! I got there even slightly before you did. They were working, and he was showing Andrew Thomas was demonstrating the difference between year one and year two, and something that he's been working on. And he was talking about not overcommitting and opening up his hips and lining himself up for an outside rush. And he was demonstrating like the one step technique where you take the first step out, first little stab, and you wait to assess. Now, if you think he's definitely going to be lining up further on your outside shoulder, well, I'm going to take those 2 hard steps. But too often, he said he would get himself fully around. To hear that he's working on these next things, if you want to like hone in on something very specific, and just to say, why did he put Kayvon Thibodeau on his butt the other day in practice? These are the little things that a Pro Bowl caliber, a not top 100 NFL player, as voted on by other players, is working on right now to say, yeah, you're number 2, where I really turned it around and excelled. Wait until you see me in your number 3. Because now I have these other little areas that I want to tweak. So I'm just excited to watch it when we talk about like, who do I really love and I'm excited to watch all year. Yeah, I just want to see Andrew Thomas look dominant no matter who's lining up against him.
Yeah, watching Andrew Thomas, make sure that he continues his evolution. I saw the same videos that you did. It looked great. I was excited about how he's thinking about it. I he looked like he had full command of the position and understanding even like the little nuances of what's going on. It's the confidence that you want to see in the guy that you just paid, I don't know, $20 million a year to be your left tackle of the future.
Yeah, and really quick, just on before we get to Darren Waller, as far as camp notes and guys that are rising and falling, I only want to cycle back for one brief second to make a big note about Tre Hawkins, who's been playing so well, and obviously Deonte Banks, who's still coming along here. A little note that Adoree Jackson was getting used in the slot over some of these sessions. He was asked about it, said he hasn't done it in a long time, but hey, whatever works, it's all good. And Wink Martindale and just a little bit of versatility is, of course, nice on the defensive side. But Darnay Holmes, Rodarius Williams, who notoriously is a big favorite for Andrew Makowitz, but also was a guy that came out and complained about his reps and starting last season. The back end of this secondary unit is becoming very interesting, and I'm curious to see in these sessions too with Detroit. Are you seeing any inclination of maybe how the Giants in the short term will try to cobble together the secondary while Deonte Banks is learning, right? Because now you're trying to play Tre Hawkins maybe in the best suited position outside. So then can't put Deonte Banks in the slot? Maybe a little bit of Adoree Jackson will get mixed in there for certain plays when you need to go deeper. So it's just gonna be fun to see the mix and match there as we look at these practice sessions. Darren Waller specifically. Let me provide you with a delicious quote here, Andy, and then you can take away the stats that we pulled up here just to iterate how important he could be for the growth of this offense. Wink Martindale had this to say about Darren Waller. It's like he's eating peanuts off the top of people's heads as he was talking about Darren Waller just elevating, high pointing the football, and dominating the secondary. When you hear lines like that, not just from Wink Martindale, but we watched him in these practice sessions, we're watching him in camp, and then we think about, like, we know the gravity of having a player like that. I think it's interesting to look at the impact he could have on other receivers on this roster, not even high-profile guys right now like Jalin Hyatt, but like Isaiah Hodgins going into what could be a second big year for him. There is some one-to-one history about what it means to have a tight end like Darren Waller on the field.
Daniel Jones has not had a player like Darren Waller at the tight end position. So it changes the whole dynamic of the team. In fact, we talk about the wide receiver core and the weapons on the outside as a whole for the Giants. Even bringing someone in like Waller, he's going to have an impact not only on someone like Daniel Bellinger, not only on Daniel Jones, but potentially the entire wide receiver room for the New York Giants.
Yeah, and that's why we were pulling up stats here. Like, I was thinking about this and I was trying to find it. And I was going through the last couple of years when you go and look at Darren Wall and you think about those back-to-back big seasons with the Raiders. And it was like, if you look inside the wide receiver room for the Giants, you think about Saquon Barkley benefiting too, right? But when you look inside the wide receiver room, let's not even think about necessarily Darius Slayton, although I think he'll benefit. And by the way, reports are he's been working on his hands, so he doesn't have that 10% drop rate that he had over the last couple of years. or a player like Jalin Hyatt who can be a burner, and there's an impact there too. But when I look at like a guy potentially like Isaiah Hodgins coming off a breakout year, you ended up finding, I couldn't find it. I wanted to. You ended up identifying the player that provides this great sample size, I think, of like what your stats had looked like and then what they can look like when you have Waller on the field with you.
Yeah, so in 2020, which was the year where Darren Waller had almost 1,200 receiving yards, he was the be-all everything for the Oakland Raiders. Had 9 touchdown catches. He was kind of the focal point of the middle of the field, which opened up things outside for the Raiders and Derek Carr. One player that had a career year was a guy that you may not necessarily say, oh, well, he's the number one type of wide receiver, but that's Nelson Aguilar. So Nelson Aguilar in 2020 had almost 900 receiving yards and tied his career high with 8 touchdown receptions, while also having his largest yards per reception at 18.7. So what that said to me, Adam, was at 18.7, he's a 4.42 40 kind of guy, 6 foot tall. Because there was so much attention being paid to Darren Waller over the middle, it allowed for these vertical threats, or it forced safeties to kind of jump in and bite in a little bit earlier, which opened up a lot more on the outside for these wide receivers like Nelson Aguilar, who you wouldn't say is a guy that can automatically get separation and beat people one-on-one. Yet the impact of Darren Waller is felt in his one season with Darren Waller. He has all these accolades that are his career highs.
Yeah, and that's why again I think that, and full credit to you for finding it, because I was rolling around some inaccurate samples that I was looking for there. But when you think about the Giants, and again, like I'll point to Isaiah Hodgins, who we know comes over from the practice squad for the Buffalo Bills, breaks out. Again, when you look at these and you think about, well, 33 receptions on 42 targets, 351 yards, 4 touchdowns, and you say, well, it's not mind blowing. Yeah, but he did it in 8 games when he, coming over for the Giants. So if you want to extrapolate those numbers out and think about him not just taking a bump here, you mentioned the average per reception for a guy like Nelson Aguilar, 10.6 per reception for Isaiah Hodgins last year. When you think about now, and you mentioned even Bellinger in there, and we think about Darius Slayton and Jalin Hyatt, okay, these guys are burning. They're stretching the field. Who knows? Daniel Bellinger going to be using some easy bleed out routes or maybe things over the middle. Darren Waller is going to occupy space in the middle of the field, but he can also be pulling guys deeper. And you can think about it in 2 levels, right? Isaiah Hodgins working over the short 10 to 15 yard middle of the field, or Isaiah Hodgins working some of those deep routes, which, yes, they're going to take a little bit longer to develop. But a safety is going to either, the safety is going to be one of 2 things: getting terrified about the speed that you're using down the sidelines, being concerned about Darren Waller sitting down over the middle. So I think that, like, for a guy who is not going to be predicated on speed and separation like Isaiah Hodgins, you could look at him and say, hey, as long as I know, not unlike the way Waller, right? I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm more physical. If I can get myself between the ball and the quarterback, I feel like I'm going to be able to come down with a lot of these. And we saw his catch percentage last year was excellent. So it's like, to me, we could be talking about Hodgins. You mentioned 900 yards for Nelson Aguilar. Hodgins may be a breakout guy here who's going for 800 yards this season, predicated, and touchdowns as well, predicated on the fact that he's the 5th most concerning weapon on the Giants offense. And so many eyes are going to get pulled by what Darren Waller's doing.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Hodgins. Like, I think he's going to have a great year regardless if Darren Waller was there, because he did it
Right.
last season. You mentioned don't get caught up in the Jalin Hyatt or Darius Slayton, but there are so many comps to something like how Nelson Aguilar has been to what Darius Slayton has been. They are both speedy guys. They both have had issues with their hands and drops. And yet when you get more open, you get more Darren Waller over the middle, you've seen what Nelson Aguilar can do where he flourishes. And so for me, I'm kind of looking at Darius Slayton saying maybe he's not the most forgotten man. While Jalin Hyatt has had a great start to trend, I still see this as, like, really we could see untapped potential in Darius Slayton with someone like Darren Waller alongside him.
Yeah, it's not a bad way. And by the way, at the end of the day, as we like to say, when we get into these Detroit practice sessions, that's something fun to look for as well. Who is having the success, right? We expect Darren Waller to have some big catches here. We expect maybe Jalin Hyatt to look dynamic as a rookie, and good confirmation on him. But again, the Paris Campbells, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepherds, right? Like, these are the guys that I think it'll be fun to see them in these joint practices saying, oh yeah, he was wide open. Oh, yeah. Nobody was concerned about him, right? Who are the players that are just benefiting strictly from a numbers game and saying, hey, you're going to have one-on-one matchups against some of the weaker assignments on the defense? You need to capitalize. You need to win, right? So Darius Slayton, you got to get every one of those balls. Or Daniel Bellinger, you need to really break it down when you get lined up with a linebacker that's supposed to be in run support and suddenly is trying to keep track of you 10, 7, 10, 15 yards down the field. It makes for a very exciting couple of days here and week leading up, obviously, to the preseason game. And we'll be back in, I think, probably on Wednesday. Give a little recap of the first, maybe even the second practice session. Wait until the afternoon so we can encapsulate it and then look forward to what we want to really hone in on when it comes to that preseason game. I would say closing thoughts, Andy, but I think you're satisfied, right?
I feel good. Like you said, we're going to come back in before the Detroit Lions game, Friday, 7 p.m. Obviously, these practices are leading up to this game. We'll talk about what our expectations are for actually live football, live snaps. Who are you wanting to see break out? Who are you saying wanting to see more consistent? And who should be bubble wrapped for game one?
You better believe it, man. You get us over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast, over on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at Andy Mac 214, at Adam Armbrecht. And if I could, real quick, because I enjoyed one heck of a session over on Twitter Spaces, and I wanted to give the shout out to Base 718. I wanted to shout out Ashton Anthony, and I wanted to shout out All the N Tick because we were just chopping it up there. Base is the one who was running it. These guys were having a great conversation. It was Giants and non-Giants related discussions, but it was really fun. So sometimes there's good football discussions to be had out there. Go enjoy those. And until next time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.